You're listening to an Ono Media podcast.
Good morning, and thanks for joining me for Rise in Crime, your morning caffeine hit all about crime. I'm Mama Jules, and let's just jump right in today to Katy, Texas. We now have a conclusion to the murder trial of Benjamin Elliott. This all happened back in September of 2021. Benjamin and his twin sister Megan were just 17 years old, and they were still living with their parents, Michael and Kathy Elliott. And life was about as average as it could be. The twins attended Cypress Park High School. In the mornings and afternoons, they would walk to and from the school bus together. A neighbor even reported that she had seen Benjamin hold an umbrella over his sister Megan's head as they were walking to the bus one morning. Benjamin was slated to take the ACT test on the upcoming Saturday. And Megan and Benjamin's older sister, Elizabeth, well, she had moved out, but was still part of the siblings' lives. On that September evening, dinner had happened. The family went to bed. All seemed well until the whole mundane and what we would call normal world was shattered by a 911 call that was made by Benjamin in the early morning hours. He was pretty calmly telling the dispatcher that his sister wasn't okay. The dispatcher asked Benjamin if his sister had any serious bleeding. He responded by saying, "Yes, I stabbed her in the neck." Startled, the dispatcher asked if she was alert. Benjamin, again calmly but sort of out of breath, says, "No, she's barely alive." When officers arrived, they found Benjamin performing CPR on Megan, per the dispatcher's instructions, as Megan lay motionless with one leg dangling over the edge of her twin-size bed. Officers let Benjamin continue the CPR as they waited for medical personnel. But watching them on the police body cam footage, they seemed to be just, kind of allowing the scene to play out. And what I mean by that is I think they know Megan is gone, but they aren't going to stop her brother from trying to save her. Now, some question this action. Why didn't they arrest him immediately? They made the call to wait, and their words were to preserve life if it is even possible. And according to police body cam footage, they do eventually cuff Benjamin later on in the home as the scene continues to play out. Benjamin had alerted his parents to the stabbing during the 911 call, just moments before first responders arrived. Michael had looked into the bedroom and witnessed his son performing CPR. He held his wife back, not allowing her to see her dead daughter and to see her son, who it appeared had killed that daughter. As Benjamin was being led out of the home in cuffs, you can hear his anguished father say, "What happened, son?" Benjamin mumbles something in return. To me, it sounded like he might have said, "I don't know." The sheriff's deputy told Benjamin as he was leading him to the patrol car that if you treat me with respect, I'll treat you with respect. Benjamin responded on the police cam video by saying, "I don't deserve respect. I just killed my sister." Well, back in the home, the parents are dumbfounded, but aware enough to have called their attorney. Michael, the dad, tells police that his son has autism and that he hadn't been feeling well for the past 2 days. The parents then tell police they will speak with them if their attorney is present, and that for now, they're not allowed to search the home. As Benjamin was questioned at the station, he's truly emotionless, and that seems to be a theme here. Somewhat emotionless on the 911 call, very reserved yet sorrowful about the stabbing, and this all as detectives talk with him. After charges of first-degree murder are filed and Benjamin is released on bail to the custody of parents, the reserved behavior just continues. Now, during that initial interview, Benjamin tells the police that he was dreaming when he stabbed Megan and pulled the knife from her neck, and he took it from the room. He also said he stabbed her around 3 o'clock in the morning. Now, that doesn't line up with the 911 call at all. That call happened closer to 5 a.m. He said he was having what he called a, quote, realistic nightmare, and that he had, quote, stabbed her, then I wasn't stabbing her. He then said the following: I freaked out and, put the knife down and put a pillow on her to try and stop the bleeding. Then I called 911 from my phone. Well, police immediately got a warrant for the house and for Benjamin's phone. While searching the home, they collected the murder weapon. That was a survival knife belonging to Michael. Also, that knife was sort of like a preoccupation for Benjamin. Detectives learned later that Benjamin was somewhat fascinated with the knife. And remember that attorney that was called pretty quickly? Well, he was fast at work with the press as well. Within hours, he had released a statement that Megan and Benjamin were the best of friends and extremely close. Photos of the two together from childhood were released. They're side by side on the beach, and they're sitting on a couch together laughing, wearing costumes as kids. Well, 2 days after the murder, a court hearing was held to determine charges and then other preliminary matters. Benjamin wasn't present. He had already been admitted to a mental health facility. Now, as the trial loomed closer, the prosecution learned that Benjamin's attorney was planning on presenting a sleepwalking defense. They contended that Benjamin, in a haze, stabbed his sister, then woke and realized what he had done, so he called 911 and tried to save his sister's life by performing CPR. Well, it took nearly 4 years, but the trial began 2 weeks ago in Katy, Texas. And remember, Benjamin was just 17 when the murder occurred, but prosecutors chose to try him as an adult. As the trial kicked off, something kind of unusual happened. The prosecution gave a very clear and concise opening statement, but the defense waived their right to an opening statement. So the trial just started with the witnesses right after the prosecution laid out their case. What did the prosecution say? According to them, the first responders found Megan lying in sticky blood that had started to gel. The blood didn't seem fresh to them. That leads to a question. Had Benjamin delayed the 911 call? Well, the prosecution presented cell phone evidence explaining the delay. According to forensic cell phone evidence, Benjamin's phone was active for several minutes during the 3 o'clock hour. At 4:08 that morning, the evidence showed that Benjamin took 18 steps. His phone records the activity due to having his health app loaded and active. At 4:17, evidence showed that Benjamin's cell phone is now locked and dormant for the next 24 minutes. The phone is then unlocked at 4:41 a.m. when Benjamin calls 911. This disparity in time becomes the evidence basis for demolishing the sleepwalking defense. Then the state told the jury the sleepwalking defense was invalid for 4 specific scientific reasons. So we have the forensic cell phone reasons, now we have the scientific reasons. They claimed that while sleepwalking, the brain has no short-term memory, basically saying the frontal cortex shuts off. So if Benjamin was sleepwalking, he wouldn't have been able to remember details, like pulling the knife out of his sister's neck. Second, the state said that while someone is sleepwalking, they aren't dreaming. Again, the frontal cortex is shut off, so they say Benjamin couldn't have been having a vivid dream where he killed someone and his sister then ended up being the unintended target. Now, third, they claimed experts would testify that neither provocation or proximity occurred on that September morning. That means Benjamin wasn't startled awake, which would provoke him to lash out in violence. And also proximity wasn't at play. Megan was asleep in her bed. She wasn't near Benjamin to startle him. And then lastly, confusion wasn't a good enough reason for stabbing someone. They reasoned if Benjamin was in a confused state, then he is still responsible for his actions. Confusion isn't sleepwalking, at least according to the prosecution. Now, while the prosecutors were presenting their case, they called Michael, the dad, to the stand. He emotionally told the jury that the bloodied woman in the evidence photo that he was being shown, well, that was his daughter. He again told jurors that his son was on no medication on the night in question and that he did not suffer from long-term illness. Michael also admitted that his son was enamored with that survival knife. Benjamin's defense attorney called an expert witness to explain that Benjamin did not have any current health issues or mental health issues at the time of the stabbing. I take this as that they're truly doubling down on the sleepwalking claim. His whole defense was riding on this idea that he loved his sister, didn't have any health issues. I mean, the experts saying no health issues, the dad is saying no health issues, and that the unintentional stabbing was just an unfortunate event. When the sleep expert took the stand for the defense, the doctor told an anecdotal story about a chef who could make full meals while sleeping. He also said the sleepwalker could have pockets of memory. That's different than what the prosecution was contending. He said small, short episodes could be remembered that the sleepwalker would have had happen during the event. He then testified that the night in question was a night of a perfect storm, that Benjamin had sleep deprivation, sleepwalking tendencies, and proximity to a knife. When those three factors collided, Megan was stabbed. Benjamin also had a friend testify that said he had witnessed Benjamin sleepwalk at a slumber party, and that he ate a donut during that time, kind of while he was in a dream state. When he woke up, the half-eaten donut was still in his hand. And then there's Kathy, Benjamin's mom. She also testified that her twins got along perfectly well, and that her son had no motive, no reason to stab his sister. Well, the jury deliberated for 5.5 hours before returning a guilty verdict. When they did return the verdict, they requested that his sentence be lenient. And the judge, after hearing from the family, well, he agreed. Instead of a 99-year sentence, Judge Lacayo sentenced Benjamin to 15 years in prison. He told the courtroom that in the nearly 4 years that Benjamin has been awaiting trial, he has had 0 issues complying with his bond requirements. He also previously had no criminal history, nothing that would have shown violence. And with his family active in his recovery, the judge said he felt the sentence was appropriate. There's one more thing before I move on. I wanted to tell you guys that Benjamin was basically emotionless during the trial as well. Even when the verdict is being read, he's kind of just sitting there, taking notes. I think it's just his personality, and that was at play through this whole entire episode, as he's growing up, through the murder, through this trial, and I'm going to guess that's how he's going to be in prison. Now, following the sentencing, the sleep expert called by the defense said he felt that the jury just got it wrong. He said the unintentional murder was totally possible, saying it's happened in other cases. He conceded that this kind of murder is very rare, but that it could occur. Prosecutors disagreed, saying that despite not providing a motive for the murder, the cell phone evidence showed that Benjamin was awake and aware of what he was doing. He was aware that he needed to turn off his alarm that he had previously set for school the next day. He was aware that he needed to enter his numeric passcode to unlock his phone and call 911. Prosecutors also felt the pillow was actually used to muffle Megan's screams while she lay dying, not to stem the flow of blood. Now, I would love to tell you more about Megan, but I'm at a loss. I could not find an obituary. Her story is left out of the trial. When she's referenced during the trial, it's usually in the context of, how did the twins get along? I can only hope her last moments weren't nightmarish, that when Benjamin stabbed her, it was a quick and mostly painless passing. Now, this story might have left you wondering about the sleepwalking defense. It did me. So I did some research. Are you ready for this crazy story? 24-year-old Kenneth Parks out of Toronto, Canada, was acquitted of murdering his mother-in-law, claiming in his defense that he had not only slept walked, he had slept driven. In 1987, Kenneth drove 15 miles to his mother-in-law's home, beat her with an iron crowbar, and then repeatedly stabbed her. He also stabbed and choked his father-in-law. His mother-in-law died, his father-in-law lived. The defense said that Kenneth could sleep so deeply that people could not wake him. Because of this deep sleep state, he should be forgiven for his actions. Well, the jury agreed, and he was found not guilty. And then there's the story of the 32-year-old Jules Lowe out of the UK. Jules shared a house with his 83-year-old father, and in 2003, Jules brutally attacked his father and left him for dead in the driveway of the home. His defense used the sleepwalking concept, and eventually he was found not guilty by reason of insanity. He was detained in a psychiatric hospital instead of a prison. Okay, back in 1981, Steven Steinberg stabbed his wife, Elena, 26 times in Scottsdale, Arizona. He claimed he was sleepwalking due to his severe mental instability. He was found not guilty. But here's the weird part. When police showed up on that night, he claimed an intruder had broken in and killed his wife. After police discovered evidence that linked him to the murder, that's when he used the whole sleepwalking defense. Well, that whole thing made sense to the jury. They agreed. And despite saying he was suffering from mental instability at the time of the murder, they said he was found to be stable during the trial, so he just walked free. No prison time, no mental hospital stay. Now, the law has since changed in Arizona, and if that trial would have been held today, that person would have been required to spend time in a mental health facility. There would have been no walking free. And then there was Lauren and Matthew Phelps out of Raleigh, North Carolina. Lauren was a 29-year-old woman working 3 jobs. She was an auditor, a daycare worker, and she had a kind of a side gig with an MLM selling scented candles. Matthew was in school studying to be a pastor. In 2017, Matthew frantically called 911 telling the dispatcher that he had taken Coricidin cough and cold medicine before he went to bed, and that when he woke up, he was covered in blood. He said there was a knife on the bed and his wife was dead on the floor with multiple stab wounds. He even told the dispatcher he thought he had killed his wife. Well, Lauren had been stabbed 123 times, everywhere, neck, head, chest, arms. There was a problem though. Matthew had no blood spatter on him. No blood spatter from those 123 wounds, some of which were 4 inches deep into Lauren. Originally, Matthew pled not guilty, saying he was sleepwalking due to the cold medicine. But after he was faced with the death penalty, he admitted that that alibi was a lie, and he was eventually sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Now, the American Academy of Sleep has done extensive studies on this phenomenon. Violence is usually only detected with sleepwalking when the sleepwalker is startled, much like the prosecution stated in their opening statement from our first story. Now, even in cases of night terrors, violence is usually only present less than 20% of the time. And in those cases, the sleeping person is usually startled awake by another individual. Now, my kids have sleep paralysis. You know, they're in the middle of a dream and they can't force themselves to wake up and they're kind of just frozen. So in that case, violence isn't really occurring for them, but I get that sleep disorders are very real. I want to know what you think. Is sleepwalking a valid defense? And did you feel like Benjamin possibly could have been found not guilty here? Let me know in the comments. Now, I promised you a Karen Reed update in the last Rise in Crime episode, and I'm going to make good on that promise. On Tuesday, it was a wild scene in the Boston courtroom as accusations were hurled between the defense and the prosecution. All of this playing out with just a little over a month before Karen Reed is expected to go to trial for a second time in the charges stemming from her boyfriend, John O'Keefe's death. Prosecution is claiming Karen ran over John following an argument that included heavy drinking. The defense is saying that John was killed by partygoers and fellow police officers at the house where Karen dropped him off on that snowy January night. Karen's first trial ended in a hung jury, and the state has chosen to try her again. But all of that was upended last week and placed in limbo when new evidence involving 2 crash experts, well, that evidence was introduced by the state. Here's what happened a week ago. In the first trial, 2 experts, Daniel Wolf and Andrew Rentschler, testified about the Lexus and if Karen, backing up the Lexus SUV and hitting John, well, if that could have caused his injuries and his death. But evidence came to light last week that Wolf and Rentschler had possibly been in communication with the defense. Judge Beverly Canone suspended the hearing last week with, quote, grave concerns about this new information. When the hearing resumed on Tuesday, she said she had 3 primary concerns. First, she felt that she couldn't make the defense answer any questions about the potential communication with the experts, on the fly. She needed to give them ample time to understand what they were being accused of. Second, she said what the prosecution was saying last week, that it didn't match up with what she remembered in the first trial. Basically, she had concerns that what was being presented as, quote, new evidence didn't match up with how she remembered things happening last year. So she wanted to look back and not operate on the fly. And finally, she said after she looked through everything, she knew she would need some time to research and reflect before handling the hearing. That meant everyone got 1 week. During that reflection, the judge said that in the first trial, when the defense attorneys were asked if they had met the crash experts, Wolf and Rentschler, they said they had never met and that they had been hired by a third-party service. But last week, Hank Brennan, a special prosecutor from the state, said that he had obtained a bill from the company that works with Wolf and Rentschler, like this big company that provides these experts. Now, the state said that bill showed that the defense was charged $24,000 for that testimony. Brennan also said in last week's hearing that emails had been exchanged between the defense and Wolf and Rentschler, the experts. Now, in those emails, Brennan says Wolf wrote this phrase, "If you don't want me to say this, that's fine." Brennan says that implies that their testimony was manufactured. Now, here's where it gets somewhat convoluted. When the last trial started, the defense never even mentioned the experts in their opening statements. That's because they weren't even sure they could or would call them to the stand. But partway through the trial, a hearing was held outside of the presence of the jury to determine if the experts could testify. In that hearing, the defense told the judge that they had only spoken to the experts to coordinate their backgrounds, to understand their qualifications, and to kind of determine when they would testify in the trial. Now, the day before Wolf testified, an email chain was initiated with the testimony outline. That chain included both the defense and the state, as well as Wolf and Rentschler, which means both sides presumably got equal notice and time to prepare. This would imply that the experts were impartial and available to both the defense and the state. But Hank Brennan with the state disagreed. He said the relationship was murky and that only a fraction of the story was being presented to the judge. Now, the defense shot back that the accusations were meant for media and jury bias. Karen's attorney claimed that the misdirections by the state would result in damage to the defense with only 6 weeks before a jury was to be seated. What are those misdirections? Well, one that was highlighted came from last week's hearing. Brennan had said that the defense had provided the witness outline, not the federal government. Okay, that implied that the defense was hiding information and that the federal government had stepped in and supplied that expert testimony information. Well, on Tuesday, both sides agreed Brennan was wrong about that. He had mislabeled the whole thing. The defense then showed an email that proved they were the ones that shared the expert testimony and that they initiated the chain. However, Brennan with the state said that didn't even matter. That misdirection wasn't important. What was really important was the billing and the other emails. They were the important part, even if they got that first part wrong. Now, the defense said they actually did not know they were going to be billed that amount of money, that $24,000. They also said they did not pay the bill until first calling the federal government and clearing it with them, and then they paid the invoice. The defense said they did their due diligence. They checked first before a fatal mistake was made, and they called the feds because they were the ones who initially hired those 2 experts. So that might leave you asking, why is the federal government involved here? Because Up until 2 days ago, a federal investigation was occurring. Who were they investigating? Well, we have no clear idea. They won't say. Most likely, they were looking into potential corruption in the law enforcement circles in and around Boston. And I say most likely with lots of confidence. I'm telling you, that's what the federal investigation was about, even if they aren't saying it was. Now, the federal government is saying that no charges will be filed following that investigation that concluded 2 days ago. You guys, this case is a mess. When Karen was asked outside of the courtroom on Tuesday about the ending of the federal investigation, she said it didn't matter because she's innocent. Her lawyer said the whole hearing was about the state providing information out of order, and that when that happens, of course it looks incorrect. Well, nothing was decided on Tuesday, and potentially 3 more hearings will happen in the first week of March. During one of those possibly 3 hearings, Judge Canone will make her ruling about the evidence. One thing we have never discussed in reference to the Karen Read case is the connection between her and Sandra Birchmore. Okay, what's that connection? Well, in February of 2021, just 11 months before John O'Keefe died, the 23-year-old Canton, Massachusetts woman died by a perceived suicide. Sandra's death was then later ruled a homicide by strangulation, which then cascaded into former Stoughton police officer Matthew Farwell being indicted for her death. It was found out that Matthew and Sandra had been having an illicit relationship that started when Sandra was a minor. She was 15, he was 27 at the time, and they met while she was enrolled in the Police Explorers program. He was accused of murdering her to kind of cover the whole affair up. Well, the 2 cases cross over because they are both involving Boston and the surrounding area's law enforcement agencies. Here's how it connects. The same police officer responded and was first on the scene for both John O'Keefe and Sandra Birchmore. Also involved in both cases are Kevin Albert, Brian Albert, and a state trooper who was shown to be lying in Karen's case. And remember, Brian Albert was the homeowner where the party was being held that Karen was dropping John off for in January. And John and Brian and Kevin and all of the above, well, they were all work friends. Now, do I think all of this explains why the medical examiner initially ruled Sandra's death a suicide instead of a homicide? Maybe. Law enforcement has covered for their brothers and sisters in blue before. They also have not covered for their brothers and sisters before. I do think if something was happening, it would have come out in the federal investigation. And apparently, Sandra and all of that, it's been shut down. It's closed as of Tuesday. Now, the date for Matthew's trial, he's the one accused of killing Sandra, it's yet to be set. And he has remained incarcerated since his arrest in August of 2024. I'll keep you updated. More will come from Karen Read's case. Now to your comments from Monday's episode. I did a quick check to see if there have been any arrests in the Aisha Degree case since I recorded the episode a little bit early last week. And the answer is no. I think with the details that I shared in that episode, we all kind of expected something to happen pretty fast. But then I rethought that. Because it's been decades, so it makes sense to take it super slow at this point and get the investigation correct. Now, many of you were so grateful that her case has finally received some movement. Steph on YouTube said she has heard other podcasters cover the case, and she was grateful for the update and the new material. Me too, Steph. It's way overdue. And Sky says this case is the one that lives rent-free in her head. Hopefully that can be settled soon. And several of you, well, you were frustrated that the Amazon hit and run driver was only suspended. Adrian said plainly, do better, Amazon. Now, they can't really fire him completely, but they can terminate his ability to contract with the company. That's the step I wish they would have taken since he was hired by an outside delivery service. And Susie Bake didn't think that washing cars at a local Walmart was enough of a punishment for the shoplifters. I totally understand that. It was creative, though. Well, that's your Thursday episode of Rise in Crime. If you'd all do me a big favor, if you loved this episode or you have a favorite episode from the past few weeks, would you share that episode with a friend? It truly will help the podcast grow. It's one of the greatest things you can do in part of this shared experience that I have. Please send me the cases you want me to cover, the ones that are spiking your interests, and you can always leave a 5-star review or a positive comment. That does help the podcast as well. Please go ahead and like us and follow us on all of our social media accounts and our YouTube accounts here at Oh No Media. That's Murder with My Husband, Into the Dark, and of course, Rise in Crime. Join me again on Monday for more morning crime news. I'm Mama Jules, and keep safe out there.